When you set off out into the woods to pursue your passion, the last thing on your mind is that you're going to have some absolutely terrifying and wild experience that's going to make you never want to step foot out into those woods again, or that when you report it, the end result's going to completely destroy your trust and faith in authorities. But before we get into today's encounter, if you've had an encounter or know a story that you'd like to have shared here on the show, please email me at the link below. If you like today's story, please gently slap that like button. And if you haven't done so already, especially if you're a new or return viewer, please hit that subscribe button. While you're at it, spot and stalk up to that notification bell so you don't miss out on any future content. Now, let's get into today's encounters. In October of 2022, 61-year-old retired contractor Al made the way up the stairs of his two-bedroom home out in Grande Prairie, Alberta. He had just spent the last 3 weeks meticulously going over thousands of trail cam photos and maps in preparation for his upcoming elk hunt. Al was not your average weekend warrior hunter type. He had grown up hunting with his father since the age of 5, and when his father passed away when he was 30, for the past 27 years, him and his brother, every year, they would go out to the Rocky Mountains of Western Alberta, spend the entirety of the elk season off in the bush pursuing elk. It was just something they absolutely loved doing together. Unfortunately, 4 years prior, his brother had passed away, so he was actually doing these trips for the past 4 years completely on his own. Now, he would not go out for the entirety of elk season anymore. He would only go out for 1 or 2 weeks at a time. So as he made his way up the stairs, got into his room, lied down to try to get some sleep, his mind was absolutely racing, because tomorrow was a day that the past months of all of his legwork, tracking and patterning this herd of elk were going to start to come to fruition, and he was completely excited to be going out elk hunting, but at the same time he was very much filled with sorrow because even though he loved elk hunting still, it just was not the same without his brother. The next morning he woke up at 5 a.m., he got up, took a shower, had breakfast, said goodbye to his wife. Now, his wife was not a fan of him going out on these trips by himself, but she also knew how much these trips meant to Al, and she was also very confident in his abilities as well because he had been doing these type of trips his entire life. So she knew that if anybody can handle being off in the Rocky Mountains of Western Alberta by themselves, it was her husband Al. So she gave him a hug, then Al proceeded to pick up his rifle and make his way out to his truck. He got into his truck and then he made a 4-hour drive southwest of Grande Prairie to where he was going to be hunting. As he made his way off the highway onto the small gravel road that led up into the mountains, he drove for about another 15 miles, came to a spot where there was an old logging road that ran up the side of this one mountain. This was the area that he had grown up hunting. This was an area he was incredibly comfortable being with out on his own. So he turned onto this logging road, started making his way up the mountain in his Chevy Silverado with his truck camper on the back. He drove for about another 7 miles up the side of this mountain till he got to the spot where there's this big clearing right up on the side of this ridge, and that's where he was going to be setting up camp. This is where him and his father and his brother would always set up camp. This is where him and his brother would always set up camp. And it was just a place that completely felt at home to him, and he felt completely comfortable and just at peace when he was there. Once he had pulled his truck over to the side of this clearing, he stepped out. He took in a real deep breath of the mountain air, and almost immediately all these memories just started rushing back to him. Memories of hunting with his dad, hunting with his brother. And in that moment, he almost could feel their presence with him, so he reached into his jacket, he pulled out a small flask of whiskey, raised it up into the air, said, "This is for you guys," took a real quick swig, stuck it back in his coat, and then he wasted no time whatsoever setting up camp. Once he had camp set up, he noticed that there was still quite a few hours of daylight left, and he figured this would be a good time just to go do a scouting walk. He figured it had been a few weeks since he had been out there pulling camera cards from all of his trail cameras, and he decided that that's exactly what he was going to do. So he reached into his truck, pulled out his rifle case, pulled his rifle out, slung it over his shoulder, and then he started making his way into the woods. He made his way down this tiny, narrow trail that led from camp over to this other ridge that looked down into this absolutely massive, sprawling valley and a big river flowing right through the middle of it. Him and his dad and his brother had actually built this trail years ago, and him and his brother for years would faithfully every summer go out and clear any fallen timber that happened to fall across it, just to make it easier to go from camp to this ridge so that they can access this valley. So once he got to that ridge, he looked down into the valley. He stood there for a few seconds just taking in the scenery, even though he had been there countless times before. He had been out there a few weeks prior pulling his camera cards. Now, he had a lot of cameras in this valley, so when he would go out there to pull his camera cards, he was not just out there for an hour or a couple of hours. He would be out there for like 2 or 3 days pulling all these cards. He had well over 30 cards scattered all through this valley, and he knew when the elk would move through. He knew the numbers of elk in the area, what kind of bulls were in the herds, and he had one particular elk in mind for this season, and it was just this absolutely massive bull, over 360 inches, just an absolute giant. So as he stood there on this plateau looking down into that valley, he just kept thinking about all the pictures of this bull that he had on camera. So he stood there for a little while. He had his binoculars out. He was looking down into the valley, when all of a sudden, off to his left, he caught a glimpse of movement. So he immediately swung around with his binoculars, looking off in that direction. And he stood there for a second trying to figure out exactly what the hell he was looking at. Because what it appeared to be to him was this absolutely massive black animal pushing what appeared to be this big boulder up the side of this ridge up towards the top. His first thought was that it was a bear, but the more he looked through his binoculars at this thing, he could tell that this just did not match the movement of a bear at all. It matched more so the movement of a person. So then his mind went to, why the hell is there some guy pushing a rock up the side of this mountain? Let alone, how the hell is he pushing this rock up the side of the mountain? This thing just looks absolutely massive. At this point, his curiosity completely took over. Instead of just leaving it at that, he decided he was going to get to the bottom of this. He was going to find out who this person was or what this thing was. So with that, he started making his way along the ridgeline, staying within inside the trees so that whatever or whoever this was would not get a sight of him. So as carefully and stealthily as possible, he made his way from tree to tree along this ridgeline in that direction. When he was about 200 yards away from where he had initially seen that figure, he completely lost sight of it. So immediately he took a knee down behind this fallen dead tree, pulled out his binoculars, he started scanning the ridgeline, when all of a sudden he spotted the figure right up against the bush line, and it appeared that it was picking up this boulder and placing it on top of this bizarre pile of rocks that from where he was looked almost like a burial site, like a burial cairn, just rocks stacked up on top of each other in a big mound. At this point, he had no idea exactly what he was looking at. He just basically stayed behind this log, just completely awestruck at what he was watching. He knew at this point that there's no way that this is a person. A person would not be able to lift a rock this size. So his first thought at this point now went to, he's witnessing a Sasquatch burying another Sasquatch. Figured, maybe it was this Sasquatch's mate. And he was just completely awestruck. He had grown up hearing stories about Sasquatch and seeing shows on TV about them. But he was one of those people that he needed proof, and it couldn't be proof from anybody else. They could have came out on the news, admitted to the existence of Sasquatch, and he still would not have fully bought it. He needed proof for himself. Now, he was not a total skeptic. He did believe in the possibility, but he just needed that proof himself. He needed to see it with his own two eyes. So in this moment, as he's looking through his binoculars, he had that proof. And in this moment, he was not feeling any fear whatsoever. He was just feeling incredibly amazed at what he was witnessing. He watched this Sasquatch make its way back down that ridge towards the opposing tree line. And then he came up with the idea of he wanted to go get a closer look at whatever this Sasquatch was burying. So as soon as he saw the Sasquatch disappear into the trees, he quietly stood up and continued making his way from tree to tree along the ridge over towards where that pile of rocks was. When he got about 75 yards away from the rocks, all of a sudden he was just completely filled with just an absolute feeling of dread. He felt like he was being watched, and he immediately just had the feeling like if he takes one more step towards these rocks, that something incredibly bad was going to happen to him. So he took a deep breath, he started looking around, when all of a sudden off to his right, not even 40 yards away, he sees this massive black long hair covered Sasquatch looking directly at him, and its eyes were just piercing right into his. In this moment, he did feel fear. He immediately was fearful for his safety. He did not know how this thing was going to react to him being so close, and it just set off this feeling of just pure dread inside of him. Very slowly, he started backing up, just keeping his eyes fixated on the Sasquatch that was staring at him, not wanting to reach for his rifle. He did not want to appear to be a threat because he did not know if he appeared to be a threat what this thing would do to him. He already knew that this thing was incredibly powerful in order to be able to push a boulder that size up the side of a mountain, pick it up, put it on top of other rocks, and he was just 200 pounds, and he knew that if this thing was mad, if it felt threatened, it could just absolutely destroy him. So he just started taking some steps backwards, not taking his focus off of this thing. He made it about another 30 yards, so now he's about 70 yards away from it, and this thing was still the entire time staring at him. But once he was 70 yards away, he was starting to have a little bit of a harder time seeing it just because of all the trees in between him and it. And at this point, he was starting to feel a little safer, and he thought now would be a good time to turn so that he would be able to walk away at a quicker pace, and he would not risk tripping the way he was walking backwards. However, just as he was about to turn, all of a sudden he could hear all these sticks and all these branches just absolutely breaking and exploding. However, it was nowhere near ground level. This was coming from about 20 feet up in the trees. So he immediately looked up and saw this huge rock about 4 times the size of a bowling ball flying through the trees about 20 feet up off the ground, just absolutely obliterating every branch in its path. He watched this big rock fly towards him and land on the ground not even 10 yards away from him. At this point, he's like, that was my warning. I got to get out of here. This thing is absolutely ticked. So he turned and he actually started running through the trees along the top of that ridge, trying to get back to his camper. He ran for a couple hundred yards, but being 61 years old and now also at a high elevation and rough terrain, he was completely winded. So he ended up having to slow down just to catch his breath. And as soon as he slowed down, he immediately, from almost directly behind him at not even 50 yards, hears this absolute guttural scream that he could just feel basically vibrate through his entire body, followed by that sound of branches exploding in the air again as another rock comes flying right past him, hits up against the side of this absolutely massive tree, slams on the ground, and starts rolling down that ridge. At this point, he quickly took another breath, just mustered up every ounce of strength that he had, and he just started sprinting as fast as he could through the trees. Now, he was a good 1.5 miles away from his camp, and as he was running along the ridge trying to make it back to camp, every time he would stop, immediately after, he would hear again from about 50 yards behind him that same scream, followed by another rock flying through the air. Eventually, after this happened several times, he got to that initial plateau at the top of that ridge where that path was that led back to camp. And at this point, again, he stopped to catch his breath. However, this time he did not hear that scream behind him. So he turned around, looked back in that direction, and about 150 yards away, he could see this Sasquatch just standing on the edge of the ridge, looking right back at him. At this point, he took another breath, started making his way down that narrow trail, and as soon as he got back to camp, he just threw his rifle into the truck, jumped in, and started heading back towards home. He did not clean up any of the stuff that he had set up. He just wanted to get out of there as fast as possible. Now, you might think that this is the end of the story, but it's not. See, as soon as he got home, his wife could tell that he was incredibly shaken up. Plus, he had got home a week and a half early. He had only left that morning. So she asked him, "What's going on? What happened?" He ended up telling her the entire story, and then he immediately contacted conservation. While he was on the phone with the conservation officer, he told this conservation officer exactly what had happened as well, and he even gave them the exact GPS coordinates of where this happened. This officer on the phone was telling him that he had just seen a bear, and at one point, Al completely lost his mind on this officer on the phone, saying, "Enough with the BS. A bear does not walk on two legs like that, and a bear cannot pick up a rock and throw it, especially a rock that size, over 70 yards. I know what I saw, and you need to go check this out because there's something out there. I'm telling you what I saw." Again, this conservation officer was very adamant that he had just seen a bear, and eventually Al, out of pure frustration, just ended up hanging up the phone on this guy. Immediately after, he took a couple of shots of whiskey, then he headed up to bed, trying to calm his nerves and trying just to get some sleep so that he could just calm down from this ordeal. However, a couple of hours later, he was woken up by the sound of his doorbell going off. So he got up out of bed, made his way back down those stairs, got to his front door, and when he opened it up, there were these two gentlemen standing outside. They were wearing regular clothes, and they identified themselves as being part of Parks, and they said, "We have some questions for you." And before he could even say, "Guys, it's like 3 o'clock in the morning," these guys just stepped through his front door, almost shoving him out of the way. They closed the door behind him, and before he even had a chance to say anything at all, the first thing they said was, "Do you have pictures?" Al immediately looked at them and said, "What?" And they again said, "Do you have pictures?" Immediately Al's like, "No, I don't carry a camera on me. I had my phone was in the truck. No, I don't have any pictures. I have GPS coordinates, which I told conservation about. Why are you guys here?" And these guys just looked at him and said, "None of this happened, and you are never to go back to that area again, or you will be arrested." Al was completely shaken up at this point. He had no idea what to make of this situation. So he just closed the door, locked it, turned around, and he noticed that his wife was standing on the stairs, and she just had this completely puzzled look on her face as well. And she asked him, "Who was that?" And he said, "I have absolutely no idea, but I'm pretty sure I just got threatened with being arrested." With that, the two of them, they made their way back up to bed. They talked about it a little bit. The next morning, when Al woke up, he had this lingering feeling like something just was not right with all of this at all. And he just had a feeling like he had to go back to his camp, if anything, just to face his fear and to get the rest of his equipment. So he told his wife that that's what he was going to do. And his wife was completely against it, but she knew that there was no stopping him once he made up his mind. So with that, he got out to his truck, made the drive back out towards camp, and when he pulled off the highway onto that gravel road, when he got to where that logging road was, it was completely blocked by vehicles. There were multiple conservation vehicles, multiple unmarked vehicles or a couple of police vehicles as well from the RCMP. And he just kind of stopped his truck looking towards this massive blockade pretty much right in front of that logging road, when all of a sudden he saw those same two guys that came to his house the night before walking directly up to his truck. They came up to him and they said, "We told you last night if you ever came back here, you would be arrested. This is your last chance. Leave now. Don't say anything else about this, or you will be looking at serving time." Al, again, had no idea why they were threatening him. He said, "Why are you threatening to arrest me?" And the guy just said, "Leave now or you're under arrest." At this point, Al really did not want to press his luck anymore, so he turned his truck around and started heading back home. Now, Al is very sure that what he had come across up on that ridge was a Sasquatch burying another Sasquatch. But what really confuses him is the fact that when he did report this to conservation, they tried to convince him that it was just a bear. And then those guys showing up at his house and then that massive blockade across that logging road, he just does not understand why they would go through that type of effort to basically deny that this happened. And he has a feeling that this has happened to more people than just him, and it's left him completely questioning all of his trust in the authorities. Well, that's it for today's encounter. All I can really say about this one is wow. I've heard of similar type things happening before, but never to this extent. So my question to you guys is, who do you think these guys were, and why do you think they went through such an effort of blocking that area off to Al and threatening him? Let me know in the comments what your thoughts on that is, as well as if you've ever heard of this type of thing happening as well. But as always, thanks for joining us, and if you haven't done so already, hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you next time.